This episode of the Best Armies in Warhammer 40k is sponsored by the Carnage Con and the King and the Mountain GT. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the Best Armies in Warhammer 40k, the weekly video series where we go through undefeated results from the last week of competitive play, talk about what is winning. And we had a big weekend this week that was punctuated by many major and super major level events, including the Salt City GT, the Krefeld Major, and most importantly, the Lone Star Open. I am currently on the road traveling back from the Lone Star Open, which I finished live streaming just a few hours ago, and we had some absolutely insane games, maybe some of the most consistently tight games of Warhammer 40,000 that I've streamed on the channel. I will drop links in the video description to my coverage of that event. Please go check that out, and I'll be discussing some of the lists that went undefeated at that event in this episode. But with that, let's talk about a metagame breakdown and talk about what is currently dominating the metagame. We have some usual suspects that we would come to expect these days. That includes things like Orks at number 1 at the Lone Star Open, Denver 40k Fight Club, and Village Brawl. Emperor's Children took down the Salt City GT and Ragnarok GT, two large events from the weekend, as well as the J-Town Throwdown. Thousand Suns won a 5-0 result at the Krefeld Major. That event ended up going 5 rounds, but had a bunch of players, so ended up with 3 undefeated results at the end. They also took down Modhammer and the Ringkriege 7 Castle Clash. Dark Angels had 2 undefeated results at the Lone Star Open. That ended up running 6 rounds, but as a super major at 340 players, it ended up having many undefeated players at 6-0. They also won the Kent Major. Space Wolves took down another undefeated result at the Krefeld Major, as well as the Dice and Bolter GT. Interestingly, Adeptus Mechanicus with 2 undefeated results at the Clowns Massacre 3, as well as GT Santa Brigida. Chaos Space Marines also with an undefeated result at the Krefeld Major. Leagues of Votann at the Lone Star Open alongside Imperial Knights. Adeptus Custodes won the Saffron Slam 14. Genestealer Cults and Tau Empire both placed at 5-0 at the Your Hobby Place Road to Nova GT. Chaos Demons took down the WG August GT, and last but certainly not least, Necrons undefeated at the Gathering GT. And we'll talk about these lists just after a word from our sponsor. This video has been sponsored by Carnage Con and their upcoming miniature gaming tournaments. Carnage Con is an annual convention held in the gorgeous Killington, Vermont, this year occurring October 16th through 18th, 2026. And while Carnage Con has a ton of events for you to participate in, over the last couple of years, it's also been expanding into Warhammer offerings. That includes the first annual King of the Mountains GT, full-size GTs for both Warhammer 40k and Age of Sigmar. Both of these will be 5-round events for up to 32 players at the absolutely gorgeous Killington Grand Resort. So if you want a nice fall getaway punctuated by absolute carnage and a 5-round Warhammer GT, check them out in the links down in the video description. You can self-register on the event's Best Coast pairing page, but keep in mind that you'll have to buy a pass from the Carnage 29 official tabletop events page in order to secure your spot. And get them now because at the time of recording, they are filling up. So again, mark aside your weekends, October 16th through 18th, 2026, and revel in a little bit of carnage. Starting with our metagame frontrunner, let's talk about Orks and Derek Apshay's list from the Lone Star Open. Now, obviously, Derek is from the 40k Dirtbags YouTube channel. Go check him out if you haven't. And I streamed his game in the final round against Tyranids. In this case, Derek was playing a combination of Freebooter Crew and Equatorial Hordes. Freebooter Crew is the detachment that allows you to choose objectives to gain sustained hits on. You also gain access to some pretty powerful stratagems, such as the ability to turn your units back into a log, as well as some powerful enhancements. Equatorial Hordes allows you to scout multiple of your boys mobs, and with the army focused around 3 giant bricks of boys with multiple attached characters, that detached ability is absolutely insane. In this case, we started off with Gazgul Thraka alongside a Pain Boy inside a unit of 20 boys. We have a War Boss and a Pain Boy alongside another unit of 20 boys with the Cunnin Hunter enhancement on the War Boss that gives them a reactive move. We also have another War Boss with a Pain Boy and a Captain in another another unit of 20 Ork boys. The captain allows your units to unbattle shock once per battle round at the cost of D3 mortal wounds. That allows the war boss to continuously allow the boys to press forward, use their stratagems, and importantly, obsec central objectives, because the army is playing take and hold as its force disposition. We then have Zodgrod Wartstagga and a unit of Gretchen as an additional scouting unit, so the army is scouting a total of 4 units of 20 plus models that can then WOG in the early game, gain invulnerable saves. Obviously, Zodgrod compounds that with wound penalties and all sorts of stuff. Those are going to push up directly up the center of the battlefield and use the Freebooter crew stratagems to emphasize their damage. We then have a Deathkiller Wartrike as well as a unit of Warbikers as another offensive aggressive piece. Following that up, we have 2 utility pieces, Boss Snickrot for some scoring, as well as Wazdak at Gutsmack. Gutsmack is largely in there as a little bit of a counterpunch, and he also could threaten turn 1 pretty well, just because he is so fast, even without the use of the WOG. So the rest of the army, while it's pushing up the table, it could be screened. Wazdak is capable of still threatening important pieces on your opponent's side. We then have a pair of Gretchen squads for utility and a commando squad, importantly, to infiltrate in the center of the battlefield in order to prevent enemies from stopping your boys mobs from scouting. Now, moving on over to the 100-player Salt City GT, this event was won by Jack Murphy, going 7-0 with Emperor's Children. Not the only undefeated result Emperor's Children saw this weekend, and they had some very good showings at very large events. In this case, Jack was doing so with a Carnival of Excess and Frenzied Host combination. This obviously gives you massive improvements to your battle line units, which includes Infractor squads with Lord Exultant in them. We also have Carnival of Excess granting sustained hits, and these can compound with one another. So if we have nearby demons, the demons can empower the battle line units who are already gaining bonus strength on their attacks with those sustained hits and push them to even further damage. And in order to facilitate that, we have 3 Lords Exultant with 3 units of 5 Infractors. One of them has the Dark Blessings enhancement, and one of them has the Possessed Blade. We also then have a ton of Demonettes in order to spread around the battlefield, act as disruption pieces, as well as provide those sustained hits. That's 40 total Demonettes in 4 units of 10, with a Tormentor squad as well to act as backline utility unit. Following that up, we then have a Keeper of Secrets, as well as a Chaos Rhino to carry some of those Infractor squads to the battle, and a pair of Defilers. Now, the Defilers are also going to be gaining that sustained hits, so they work in a lot of ways like classic Defiler builds from Chaos Space Marines, where you are firing just this mass of attacks. It's all gaining sustains, and because of the detachment ability, the Reaper autocannons, which these guys are being equipped with, gains critical 5s because they already have sustain built in on their datasheet. They could be babysat by either things like the Demonettes, which can remain hidden while they're providing that aura of sustained hits and improved criticals, or you can do so with the Keeper of Secrets. And the Keeper of Secrets also offers you another big, long threat range, powerful piece that your opponent has to split fire between either that model or the Defilers themselves. So as your opponent is trying to deal with these massive infantry that is pushing up the table to you, you are also being able to threaten them with multiple of these big, heavy targets that they usually can't deal with all at once. It's a real threat overload situation, and with the speed that Emperor's Children can deliver these threats at, it is extremely, extremely powerful. And we're going to stick with Chaos Space Marines for a moment here and talk about Thousand Suns, moving over to the Krefeld Major. This list in particular was piloted by Thomas Buetelmann, who was running a Grand Coven. And this is probably going to look like a pretty familiar list to anyone who's been paying attention to Thousand Suns for a while. It's a very 10th edition style of list that is, unfortunately, kind of the metagame for Thousand Suns these days, because a lot of the more recent evolutions of the faction have been nerfed. Although maybe with good reason, because even falling back on their old tropes, Thousand Suns still consistently put up many event wins every week. In this case, we're doing so with a Sorcerer attached to a Rubric Marine squad, a Terminator Sorcerer with the Umbralific Crystal to pick his unit up and then drop them back down in a unit of 10 Scarab Occult Terminators. We have a Winged Demon Prince with the Eldritch Vortex of Etaf, Magnus the Red, the Great Man himself, in addition to a single Defiler and a unit of Psychotar Robots, 1 unit of Chaos Spawn for utility, alongside 2 Zangor Enlightened squads. Those are the standard Divining Spear, Zangor Enlightened, and a unit of Zangors. Fairly standard stuff for Grand Coven Thousand Suns. The Scarab Cult Terminators are a massive brick and a boatload of damage. They can pull focus from the monsters such as Magnus Red and the Winged Demon Prince, who can really rapid ingress or ether stride into your opponent's backline. Two, as you are beating them up with Sorcerers and Rubric Marines and Scarab Cult Terminators, really mess up their utility units or deal some damage himself to your opponent's backline units. Being equipped with mostly psychic weapons himself, he can act as a little bit of a resource funnel. If Magnus the Red isn't able to get mixed up in the fight, you can give him things like rerolls and stuff, and even in a lot of cases, with Psyker characters being as prevalent as they are in many factions, this guy goes crazy getting full hit and wound rerolls against those Psyker characters. Now moving back on over to the Lone Star Open, Dark Angels ended up having multiple undefeated results at this event. In this case, the highest positioned one is Noah Lockhart running Company of Hunters and Dark Flight Pursuit, a really classic combination of detachments that both kind of overlap their buffs on Ravenwing units. Company of Hunters allows the entire army to advance and shoot, then also grants advance and charge to your Ravenwing squads. Dark Flight Pursuit gives you ignore cover on your land speeders, your Ravenwing vehicles. So all those things combined, you can use that ignore cover to buff up things like your land speeder vengeances and your thunder strikes, who can in turn fire support for units like your Ravenwing Black Knights, who can push up the battlefield and kind of establish a line of scrimmage in your opponent's side of the table. That allows the land speeders themselves to fire for multiple turns and really just become this brutal attrition engine. In this case, Noah was rocking a Ravenwing command squad inside an Outrider squad. The Outrider squad is going to grant them +1 damage on the charge. They're also taking Recon Hunter as an enhancement, so that unit is going to gain Scout. That makes for a strong early game disruption piece that can really threaten your opponent in their deployment zone, which forces them to either deploy infiltrators aggressively or deploy themselves farther back, or simply lose assets on turn 1 to this unit that is relatively inexpensive. We then also have Samael inside a Ravenwing command squad alongside another Outrider squad, a 3-model unit. These guys are a relatively limited number of models, but the damage output that they have is immense. Company of Hunters does have a Lance stratagem, so you can give the entire unit +1 to wound. Again, the Outriders are improving the damage of everyone in the unit, so we're coming in with a 3 damage Ravenwing champion, 3 damage sustained hits, 2 attacks from Samael himself, in addition to 2 damage devastating wound attacks from the Ravenwing command squad, and 2 damage AP1 chainsword attacks from the Outriders. Between those, especially the 2 character models, the damage from these guys is immense, especially if you're not going into particularly high toughness characteristics. If you're hitting something that's toughness 11 or I guess 9 or lower, sort of a mid-weight vehicle, for example, those 2 power sword weapons with the Outrider charge bonus are going to go insane. We then have another Ravenwing command squad alongside a unit of Ravenwing Black Knights for some more dedicated anti-tank, because these guys are of course going to get anti-monster, anti-vehicle with devastating wounds on their melee attacks. That gives them a relatively decent charge, but the other thing is that they're also able to pack 6 Plasma Talons, so they can actually do some pretty serious shooting. And speaking of serious shooting, we're also running Azrael, the Chapter Master, to generate command points. He's inside a unit of 5 Stern Guard veterans. These guys, when they shoot their Oath target, of course, gain full hit and wound rerolls. Azrael's going to be able to leverage that to generate a bunch of devastating damage from both the Stern Guard veterans and his own weapon. And the big thing there, too, is that the Company of Hunters allows Azrael to advance and shoot. That's something he can't normally do. Whereas Stern Guard veterans are largely assault weapons, Azrael isn't. So if he doesn't have the ability to advance and shoot, sometimes he gets left behind, which is a little bit weird. We also then have Lionel Johnson for some melee counterpunch, an Incursor squad to buff that shooting alongside a Storm Speeder Thunder Strike, so we can leverage a lot of that plasma fire from things like Land Speeder Vengeances and the Ravenwing Black Knights in the command squads in order to actually knock down heavy targets, because we can give that +1 to wound. So we can net a potential +1 to hit, +1 to wound, Oath a moment a second target, and then fire into it with Land Speeder Vengeances and with Azrael. That's going to generate a bunch of full hit and wound reroll attacks into your second target, whereas your first target you can just be relatively high output anyway, potentially knock down 2 things per turn before you even charge in. We then, of course, have the 3 Land Speeder Vengeances. In this list, 2 of them are equipped with Nightforge batteries, which improve the shot count of their Plasma Storm batteries, gives you reroll the number of attacks. For utility, we then also have a pair of Scout Squads and a single Invader ATV. Now we're going to return to the Krefeld Major for the #1 winner of the event, placed in first. This was Mario Tietz running Space Wolves. Now in this case, it is the build of Space Wolves is very common right now that's focused very, very, very heavily on big units of Wolfguard Terminators. In this case, we are running a total of 3 units of 10 Wolfguard Terminators. 2 of them have attached characters. One of them is with Logan Grimnar, another one with a Terminator Captain with Grimnar's Mark. Both of those in those massive units of Shield and Sword Wolfguard Terminators. We have a unit of Wolfguard Head Takers with a Wolf Priest. He's going to, of course, give them the ability to regenerate models back, and also his wound bonus. Those guys are equipped with paired mastercrafted power weapons, so they are relatively easy to kill. They have to get through the 3 wounds, but the unit will die. However, with the new attachment rules that allows the Wolf Priest, as long as he doesn't die, and he has an invulnerable save, so he's tougher to kill. If you're being attacked by a single attack group or a limited number of attack groups, then he'll likely survive, and then he'll start regenerating Wolfguard Head Takers back to the unit, of course, which is very powerful. We then have Bjorn the Fell-Handed, an Intercessor squad for some backline objectives secured, a little bit of utility from a unit of Fenrisian Wolves, a Landreader Redeemer to deliver those Wolfguard Terminators, and we also have as our 3rd unit an unattached unit of Wolfguard Terminators. All of those Wolfguard Terminators equipped with mostly Power Fists, or mostly Storm Shields, 2 Power Fists, as well as 2 Assault Cannons, and the Relic Great Axe on the unit Champion. I don't believe any of these units are coming with a different composition. Now, with that, we could talk about some Adeptus Mechanicus. So we're going to move over to the Clowns Massacre 3. This is being held in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, which is very cool. In this case, the Zabi Sevi ended up playing this list, going X-0-1 with a draw in the finals, but ended up actually being the first in terms of tiebreakers. We'll talk about the list here. It is interesting. It's a combination of Lords of the Forge and Rad Zone Core. So Rad Zone Core obviously is the detachment that allows you to irradiate your opponent's deployment zone from the start of the game. In this case, he's also taking Radial Suffusion on one of the characters, that being a Tech Priest Genestealer, in order to extend the range at which that effect takes place. So at the start of the first battle round, there is a chance that all models in the opponent's deployment zone will take mortal wounds. They can either choose to battle shock themselves in order to make that a 5+ chance to take D3 mortals, or they can stand firm, not battle shocked, but receive mortal wounds on a 3+. Then, at the start of your command phase on future battle rounds, on a 3+, you're going to deal 1 mortal wound to everything inside your opponent's deployment zone, that extending 6 inches out thanks to Radial Suffusion, as long as that Protect Priest Engineer is on the battlefield. Now, in this case, we're taking a couple of interesting units. First of all, we have a combination of a Tech Priest Manipulus and a Skitarii Marshal inside a unit of Histari Fusiliers. The Fusiliers come packed with Neutron Fusils, which is a las cannon equivalent profile, but every time they target a monster or vehicle unit, they gain Ignore Cover. They'll also gain hit rerolls from the Skitarii Marshal. So, between TL09 as well as the 5 Neutron Fusil shots from this unit is putting out an immense amount of anti-tank firepower all in one condensed package. We then have a Tech Priest Manipulus with Peerless Eradicator. That's going to give him both lethal and sustained hits. He himself grants lethal hits to the unit. The Peerless Eradicator also grants sustained hits. He's attaching into a unit of Cataphront Destroyers with Plasma Culverins. In order to combo with that, we're also taking Phosphor Blasters on those guys, which is not commonly seen as their Flamer equivalent, I don't think. We then have Belisaria's Call alongside Thulia Gold and the engines here I mentioned before. In order to turn on our battle line synergies, we have a unit of Skitarii Rangers and a Dune Rider to deliver some of these units. The Dune Rider does provide fire support, so when it shoots a target and you disembark from it, you're also going to gain the same wound rerolls as well. So we can potentially gain full hit and wound rerolls with that Ignore Cover unit that is bringing TL09. And of course, TL09 having devastating wounds means that when it gains those rerolls, it's going to go absolutely insane. We then also have another unit of Histari Exterminators, a unit of 2 Ironstarter Ballistari, these ones equipped with las cannons for dedicated anti-tank. Similarly, we also have an Onager Dune Crawler, this one with an Eradication Beamer. These guys typically where the 5+ Feel No Pain from the Tech Priest Engineer ends up going, so that he can be a very difficult to kill brick in the center of the battlefield. He has very good save characteristics. Compounding that with a Feel No Pain makes this guy live forever. We then have a Tyranxi Skystalker unit for utility alongside his Servitor Battleclade, a unit of Sicarian infiltrators, and for a little bit of additional anti-tank, a single Scorpius disintegrator with a Ferromite cannon. Now, moving back on over to the Krefeld Major, let's talk about the final list from that event. In this case, it is Pierre Debay running Chaos Space Marines. Chaos Space Marines obviously have been nerfed pretty heavily recently, but it's cool to see the innovation from the community and bringing these guys back into the fore. In this case, we're running this kind of MSU-style Veterans of the Long War plus Cabal of Chaos combination. This includes Huron Blackheart, the Masters of the Maelstrom, as well as a Chosen Squad. We then have 2 Slaanesh Demon Princes with wings. Those Slaanesh Winged Demon Princes move up to move 14 and also essentially have a lot of the same abilities as the Emperor's Children version, which gives them mortal wounds on the charge for each remaining wound that the Demon Prince has at that time. If it moves over you, it's also forcing you to take battle shock checks, and we're running alongside that Vashtor the Archiphane. We then have a pair of cultist mobs for some utility, a single Chaos Rhino to deliver the Masters of the Maelstrom into the fight, alongside a Venom Crawler, mostly to act, I imagine, as a babysitter for Vashtor. Vashtor can pump its guns for additional strength, and then it can grant him Lone Operative, which is awesome, and then a pair of Defilers. These guys with the classic build, taking Reaper autocannons as well as Excruciator cannons. These Defilers getting rerolls from the Veterans of the Long War detachment ability is pretty spooky. You can also pay 2 command points as long as you can see a target with a Heretic Astartes character, which includes things like these very fast Demon Princes, in order to move that focus of hatred to new units when you destroy the original one. And being able to have multiple full rerolling Defilers is pretty scary, especially alongside the amount of forward presence that you can gain out of things like Vashtor, the Demon Princes, as well as, of course, Huron and the Masters of the Maelstrom. Now, at Lone Star Open, we also saw Leagues of Votann be not only very popular, but also successful, with Junior Aflahi taking them to 6-0. I did stream his game in the semifinals of the event against Necrons, which was an absolute barn burner of a game, incredibly close. And in this case, he was playing Needguard Oathband plus Hearthguard Covenant. Now, the combination of these is pretty impressive. You do get a lot of very consistent buffs from Needguard Oathband, including things like Hunter's Mark for reroll 1s, as well as enhancements such as the Oathbound Speculator. In this case, we're running Uthar the Destined with an Einhir Hearthguard unit. These guys have a teleport crest on the attach Hairseer, which allows the unit to deep strike. That actually was being used as a little bit of a backline harassment unit. Uthar the Destined could be a little bit of an annoying character to deal with. He can use Void Hardened on his own unit for free, or some of the other offensive stratagems. And then the Einhir Hearthguard, of course, get buffed from the Hearthguard Covenant detachment ability. These guys being able to hop into the back and fire devastating weapons, shots from Uthar's little pistol, as well as their own shooting, was able to kill most utility units, and they're a very difficult unit to destroy with those free stratagems from Uthar. We also saw a Cull with Ancestral Crest in a unit of Einhir Hearthguard. That's a big unit of 10. Those guys equipped with plasma guns and grenade launchers. They ended up being a huge hammer for the army, as is the case for these Hearthguard Covenant builds. We then had a Memnir strategist with Oathbound Speculator inside an Ironkin Steelcheck unit with Vulcanite Disintegrators. The combination here, of course, is that you're going to use Ancestral Sentence to give them sustained hits 2. You're then firing a 36-shot sustained 2 Fusillade, oftentimes hitting on 2s thanks to the detachment ability, and getting +1 to wound plus devastating wounds. These guys, and reroll 1s, of course. So if you shoot at sort of mid toughness targets, they will just absolutely wreck whatever they shoot at, and even into higher toughness stuff, they can wound on 5s or 4s, throwing a bunch of devastating in there. And the unit itself is just a ton of damage. It represents such a powerful unit. And then, of course, with a improved Snapfire, as well as free Overwatch from the Memnir strategist, they are almost as good on the opposing turn as they are on their turn. We also then have Buri Agnerson just as a little bit of a melee piece, a Capricus Carrier for some utility alongside a unit of Hernkin Jaegers, 3 units of Brokir Thunderkin with Graviton Blast Cannons to support the other shooting batteries in the army, as well as just deal a little bit of incidental anti-tank over the course. We had a Chthonian Berserk Squad as another melee counterpunch, alongside 2 Hekaton Land Fortresses, or excuse me, 1 Hekaton Land Fortress and then 1 Bang Bus, which is another Hekaton Land Fortress, but has all of the melee guys in it, alongside a unit of Ironkin Steeljacks with melee weapons, another little relatively hardy melee counterattack unit. Now, sticking with Lone Star Open for just a little bit longer, let's talk about Imperial Knights, who also went 6-0 there, being piloted by Jason Weeks. In this case, Jason was playing the combination of Gate Warden Lance, the classic, although it has been changed recently, alongside Throne Bonded Outriders, the armature detachment that gives your armatures ignore cover while they're being affected by a bondsman ability. In this case, we're playing Canis Rex, a pair of Knight Destriers, one of them equipped with an Augury Halo to give him ignore cover while he's on his defensive line. He also gains ignore cover when he's firing at enemies that are on an objective, so it generally makes the Knight Destrier ignore cover almost all the time, as well as a second Knight Destrier alongside Purgation's Hand, with the sustained hits and improved critical effects and things that you can grant these Knight Destriers. The amount of damage that they deal well within rapid fire range from the double gun versions. Both of these are equipped with both the Frag Bombard as well as the Chastiser Gatling Cannon is absolutely immense. It's just a withering amount of firepower, and once you buff it in almost any way, it goes kind of crazy. We do have a buff on that second Destrier with Purgation's Hand. We also then have a Knight Errant with Vengeful Tread, which gives him a free use of Crushing Impact. We also then have a trio of Armature Warclaves to benefit from the Throne Bonded Outriders effects, alongside a Sister of Battle Immolator, alongside a Sisters of Battle Squad to add some obsec and higher OC to the army. This is very much ignore cover the army in a lot of cases, because you can grant ignore cover to the armatures if you give them the Knight Errant's bondsman ability. The Knight Destriers have multiple ways to ignore cover, and you can also just strip cover from enemies using the Sister of Battle Immolator. Kind of an interesting composition there. The Immolator, importantly, is equipped with Immolation Flamers, and we have decided to strip all of the Meltaguns off of the Sister of Battle Squad to keep them lower cost. Now moving on over to the Saffron Slam 14, Adam Tubby took this event down using Adeptus Custodes, taking Lines of the Emperor and Might of the Moritoi together. In this case, he was taking an Alaris Shield Captain with Admata Mortis alongside a small unit of 3 Alaris Custodians. We then had a bunch of Custodian Guard, one, the Blade Champion with Superior Creation, alongside 2 units with Inquisitors. That's to grant the Inquisitors the wound rerolls from the Custodian Guard, as well as the benefit of Sentinel Storm for double attacks, which allows you to do some pretty serious damage with their devastating wound Psychic Shockwave. We then have a pair of 5 model Alaris Custodian squads, as well as a ton of utility, a unit of Witch Seekers and 3 units of Prosecutors to hold down the backline, alongside a little bit of aggressive push from a unit of Venatari Custodians with their Venatari Lances. While we have been seeing a lot of success from various varieties of Lines of the Emperor, we haven't necessarily seen them take as many Alaris Custodians as this particular build takes. Obviously, you can unleash the Lions in this army in order to split those units into smaller units for greater utility and more maneuverability. However, the other benefit is that these guys just become absolute monsters in shooting. Once they come out of reserve, they can drop in outside 6 inches of friendlies and fire a massive number of grenade launcher and guardian spear shots, getting +1 to wound as well as rerolls on those as well. That can represent a lot of damage, especially into light to medium infantry that they can then supplement with their powerful melee profiles. And that's kind of the story for a lot of these Lines of the Emperor builds. They really want to be able to do some pretty mid-range shooting in order to soften the opponent up before actually killing them with all of those Custodian Guard offensive profiles. Now that moves us on to the Your Hobby Place Road to Nova GT, which ended up being won by TJ Lanigan running Genestealer Cults in a combination of Xenocreed Congregation and Xenocult Masses. In this case, you're running a Patriarch with a unit of Pure Strain Genestealers for some early game aggression, an Acolyte Icon Ward with deeds that speak to the masses for additional resurgence points, alongside a Biophagus and a unit of hybrid Metamorphs. These guys can do some pretty serious damage, especially alongside the Xenocreed Congregation offensive buffs and bonuses to advance and charge. We have a Benefictus, as well as a big unit of Neophyte Hybrids, 20 in those, with a combination of heavy weapons. An Acolyte Icon Ward with Denunciator of Tyrants. This is in another unit of 20 Neophyte Hybrids. That Denunciator of Tyrants gives +1 to hit and wound targeting character units, which, as you might know, are incredibly common these days. We then have a Calormorph and a pair of Reductus Saboteurs for a little bit of utility. 2 Acolyte Hybrid Auto Pistol units for some pretty decent late game counterpunch with their heavy mining tools, but also the ability to generate command points over the course of the game. An Acolyte Hybrid Handflamer unit for some disruption. That's with a Goliath Trunk in order to deliver either them or the Hybrid Metamorphs. We then have a pair of Achilles Ridge Runners. These guys equipped with Survey Augers and their heavy mortars in order to strip cover and add crossfire to the Neophyte Hybrid squads, plus 2 additional units of Pure Strain Genestealers for some more disruption. Now, that wasn't the only list to go undefeated, and not even the only Xenos to go undefeated at that particular event. Also, there was Noah Keith playing Retaliation Kadra Tau Empire. In this case, unfortunately, the list did not actually list character attachments, so I'm kind of guessing here. I believe that what we end up having is Commander Farsight inside a plasma rifle unit of Crisis Fire Knife battlesuits. We then have a Cold Star Commander with burst cannons and cyclic ion blasters inside a unit of Starscythe battlesuits, another Cold Star Commander, same build, alongside another unit of Starscythe battlesuits, and lastly, a Missile Drone Enforcer Commander with a Starflare ignition system, so he can up down inside another Fire Knife battlesuit team, this one equipped with missile pods. So 2 total Fire Knife battlesuit teams with 1 in each attached character, a relatively close combat oriented build that has that 3 damage plasma shooting, and then a missile build that is a little bit longer ranged and able to up down to get lines of sight around the sides of the table. We then have a bunch of independent characters. That includes Darkstrider for some backline objective holding, a Firesight team for some good lone op objective control, as well as additional marker light support, and the Twin Lance. We have a Ghost Keel battlesuit to hold down the midboard, some anti-tank from a pair of Hammerhead gunships, alongside a pair of Pathfinder teams, as well as 2 stealth battlesuit teams for spotting, and a Vespid Stingwing squad. Now that's going to move us on over to Chaos Demons, which were championed by David Gaylord at the WG August GT. In this case, David was playing the Blood Legion and Cavalcade of Chaos combination. Blood Legion is the Khorne-specific demon detachment that gives you the ability to countercharge into your opponent and use a lot of reactive effects. Cavalcade of Chaos being a massive boon for the mounted units inside the demon faction. In this case, we were running a Skullmaster with Brazen Maw. That's +2 to the unit's charge rolls, in addition to the demonic instrument that they already have for a total of +3 to their charge rolls. So they can make charges out of Deep Strike at 6, which is kind of nice. We then have Be'lakor, a Rendmaster, to buff all of the Khorne demons, as well as Scarbrand to further buff the Khorne demons and also just be a beatstick. We have a pair of Blood Crusher units. One of them has the Soul Shattering Charge enhancement, alongside a pair of Fleshhound units for utility, a pair of Skull Cannons, and then interestingly, a Burning Chariot. The Burning Chariot's kind of a cool inclusion here. It is mounted keyword, so it gets all the benefits of Cavalcade of Chaos, and a big downside of the profile previously is that it wasn't able to fall back and charge. So while the Burning Chariot was kind of difficult to kill and had some decent ranged attacks, as well as some good melee attacks as well, because it has 2 Screamers on the front end of the chariot, it unfortunately would get stuck in melee and then be unable to do anything because it was not a vehicle, so it couldn't fire in melee. So you're paying kind of vehicle prices for this unit that was statted like a vehicle, but didn't actually have all of the benefits of being a vehicle. But now being able to fall back and charge and shoot, this guy can run up, do some annoying things, be hard to kill, generally be a pain in the butt, strip cover from enemies so your skull cannons are a little bit more accurate, and then jump out of melee and continue the trend. Kind of a cool inclusion in Cavalcade of Chaos, and one that I expected to see a little bit more often as the edition transitioned over, but the need for Burning Chariots was kind of alleviated by the fact that psychic weapons didn't suffer the cover penalty, so you didn't need them for actual Tzeentch demons, but they do support Khorne demons just fine. And that brings us to our last list for the weekend at the Gathering GT. Andy Quaz-Cohen going undefeated with Necrons. In this case, playing Awakened Dynasty, the classic detachment that triggers off being led by a character and allows you to reanimate those characters. In this case, we're running a Technomancer, no enhancements on him, alongside a unit of Canoptic Wraiths. We have an Overlord with an Immortal Squad, which is kind of an interesting build, although it does give a good sort of caddy for a Resurrection Orb, especially if you don't necessarily kill the Overlord, which is very difficult, alongside an Invulnerable save. If you attack them in a single attack activation, oftentimes the Immortals will just die and leave the Overlord to eat all the 4+ saves and then survive. Then he can use his Resurrection Orb to bring back the Immortals before his next command phase, so that you can regenerate back onto the objective. If you lose the Overlord, he deattaches from the unit, but there's nothing saying that he can't just reanimate the unit if he's still alive but hasn't yet been killed. We then have a Locust Lord with a Veil of Darkness, alongside a unit of 3 Locust Heavy Destroyers with Enmitic Exterminators. These guys are important for clearing infantry. The army generally has a bunch of chip damage, as well as some pretty hard hitters in the form of Catan Shards, but it does have a little bit of a problem against really, really high model count infantry squads. So Enmitic Exterminator Heavy Destroyers being able to just teleport around the table and blow those up is important. We have a pair of Catan Shards, one of the Nightbringer and one of the Void Dragon, a Hexmark Destroyer, a Luminor Seraz, Imhotep the Stormlord, and a Scorpic Lord with an Agic Durable Bond. 3, or a bunch of characters, I guess, that can all reanimate with Resurrection Protocols. We then have a Canoptic Reanimator to buff the bricks as well as a unit of Canoptech Scarab Swarms for some additional utility. I'm a big fan of these styles of Awakens Dynasty. It does have the Wraith Brick in it, but there are some Awakened Dynasty builds that are just focused so heavily on being difficult to kill and hoping to stat check your opponent out. I like these more technical builds. I think they're much more interesting. And with that, those are all the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Big thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to Carnage Con for sponsoring the video, as well as everyone who supports Tactical Tortoise, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing. This is a bit of a rapid fire one this week because it's like 2 a.m. right now, and I'm about to catch a flight in like 5 hours, so I'm sleepy. Good night, everybody. Keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.